Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
All right, with this we continue with module 3, which is urban environmental trajectories in India, plans, policies, visions and missions. This particular lecture, that is lecture 12, will focus on the Indian experience when India was part of the British Empire. So, she was a colony. So, in this particular lecture, we would be focusing on the urbanization process and the relationship between urbanization and environment within the colonial context, within the colonial framework. So, the topics that I will be covering in this lecture include the first question actually which I will be raising is it all right to use colonial urbanization as a category. So, is colonial urbanization a valid category? And I must say that when I raise this question, to a great extent I draw insights from Deepak Kumar, who is a historian of science and technology so far as colonial India is concerned, and he used this particular term called colonial science in his path-breaking book called Science and the Raj. And then Rohan D'Souza, who is an environmental historian focusing on the water scenario in South Asia, mainly floods and all. So, Rohan talked about colonial hydrology, and in my book Blue Infrastructures, I had also talked about colonial urban hydrology when I discussed blue infrastructures in the particular city of Kolkata. So, we will discuss this, that is it right to use colonial urbanization as a category or not. And when we use colonial urbanization, so do we think that it is only a kind of a temporal context? Is it a temporal category, or it has relational and symbolic component or layers added to it? So, with this we would argue that in this particular lecture that colonial urbanization, if it is not only a temporal scale, if it is not constricted within the purview of temporal scale or temporality, then it is important for us to delve deep into the distinct features of colonial urbanization. And with this, we will be mainly focusing on the emergence of networked infrastructures. So, how networked infrastructures emerged, and it also involved definitely colonial techniques, colonial hydraulic techniques when they tamed and manipulated with the ecological resources of different spatial sites which were conquered, and how this networked infrastructure facilitated trade and transportation on one hand and fundamental urban utilities on the other. And then finally, this lecture would also shed light on the fact that the British not only transplanted techniques or technologies, but they also transplanted their entire mindset, which is very much evident in their battle against filth, again which is absolutely manifested in the implementation of imperial sanitary reforms. So, these are the things which we will be covering in this particular lecture. Now, the first point, which is absolutely related to the conceptual notion of colonial urbanization, is that one need to understand that this colonial urbanization as part of colonial projects is connected to or directly connected to the notion of drain of wealth. So, for example, I mean being a student of history, I would like to discuss this a bit, because like the Indian National Congress, for the first time they one of the major contributions they actually made in the history of in actually writing the history of India is that they provided a very staunch and a strong critique or economic critique of colonialism. So, for example, the early Congress leaders like Dadabhai Naoroji, Shokharam Ganesh Deushkar, R.P. Dutt and others, they became disillusioned after a point of time, and they could realize that India was actually bleeding. So, her balance of trade absolutely turned into negative, and India was kind of, she was importing bulk of finished products, and she was raw materials were looted and plundered from the colony, from India to England, the mother country. So, this is a particular, like this graph, figure 1, figure 2, it explains what I tried to say, and this is from Dadabhai Naoroji's pivotal path breaking book called Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. So, if you understand this larger context, and if you understand the calculus of rule extremely contextualized within the larger theory or argument of drain of wealth, then you will understand that cities, when cities were constructed, the whole idea was the emergence or the construction or creation of connected cities to ensure flows of goods and commodities from the hinterlands to the cities, and that is why it also explains that why the cities which came up during the colonial times, they were port cities and fort cities. So, the colonial period also visualized the efflorescence of fort cities and port cities like Mumbai, Calcutta, Madras, etc. So, yes, I was also discussing about networked infrastructures. So, the British built and they constructed networked infrastructures which catered the interests and needs and requirements of an expanding urban area, of expanding a metropolis on one hand. So, kind of laying out provisions to cater to or to meet the urban utilities, water sanitation needs, drainage sewerage needs. So, water in, water out. So, providing drinking water to the households and to the city, and at the same time disposal of mechanisms to dispose wastewater at very affordable price. So, everything has to be extremely cost effective, in the cost effective mode, and on the other hand network infrastructures like canals, manipulated rivers, they were also used as arteries of trade and transportation to kind of establish the smooth connection or interconnection between cities and their larger hinterlands. So, and everything was, things were geared to what I call the rule of profits. So, this I think this this illustration or the diagram on the right hand side is very, very important, because we need to understand that how a colonial urbanization process, which also manipulated and tamed natural or ecological infrastructures in cities and ecological infrastructure surrounding cities. So, how and why they were actually manipulated in order to establish the rule of profits. So, the primary objective or the primary agenda was profits over expenditure, and lot of profits or revenue generation from investments which were made. Yes, we discussed the rise of modern cities in the West, and when we discuss the rise of modern cities, when we discuss rise of networked cities in the West, we definitely talked about sanitary reforms, we talked about the emergence of sanitary cities. The same thing happened here, but of course, there were transplantation constraints, and this slide to a great extent explains that how the British also planned the emergence of sanitary cities within Indian context through the implementation of a regime which is called the regime or the era of improvement. So, health, hygiene, urban habitat, all these things, they are extremely interconnected within the colonial context. And for example, H. Spodek, he has extensively worked on city planning during the British time, city planning in India, and there is one particular article which he wrote in 2013, which came out in EPW, and the name of the article itself is like city planning in India under the British. So, there he says that the biggest problem in all the large cities was providing basic infrastructures. And why it was a problem? Because one needs to understand, as I mentioned, that here in India the British faced transplantation constraints. So, for example, if South Asia is a huge context, it is very diverse, plural. So, there are, there is extremely rich regional specificities. So, each each particular region being very much determined by their own cultural and political variables, which in turn responded to the different reforms or the different projects which were actually implemented in those particular contexts. So, it is not a linear story. And there are very good books, there are works by specific urban experts and also like urban historians on cityscapes who had discussed this urban environmental, more like urban planning discourses and dimensions during the colonial time. So, for example, Mariam Dosal, she has focused on the city of Bombay. We have Pratik Chakraborty, a fairly recent work focusing on Kolkata, and we will discuss this in a more elaborate and detailed way when we take up the module on urban environmental social sciences framework, and when we will mainly focus on urban environmental history as a very recent but a very dynamic framework or approach to understand the making and unmaking, the shaping and unshaping of urban nature. So, yes, Narayana Gupta, she has focused on Delhi, and Lewandowski, he has worked, Lewandowski's work dates back to the 70s. So, Lewandowski had focused on Madras, and in all these works you will find another major constraint or challenge was shortage of municipal funds on one hand, and indifferent attitude for a long period of time, mainly indifferent attitudes towards the improvement so far as housing conditions or other living conditions of the poor or the native people were concerned. So, if you remember when we discussed the rise of modern cities in the West, we also saw that how for example, England was tackling with the challenge of resource crunch or fund crunch, and one can understand that how for the South Asian context this problem was even took a far rooted or took it had a deep rooted implication, and the challenge was more severe because the context was already the colonial capitalist political economic mode of production or colonial economic context. So, and again, like we are talking about sanitary cities, and now we understand that why and how the issue of health, hygiene, and like the continuous outbreak of epidemics also played a very important role behind the implementation of the era of improvement. So, I think empire, epidemics and ecology in cities, they are inherently connected. So, there is an inherent connection between empire, epidemics and ecology in cities. So, this is true when so far as the western cities are concerned, this is also true so far as the colonies of the west are also concerned. So, plague, cholera, malaria, just it outbroke in a rampant manner in the different urban sites, for example, Bombay, for example, Kolkata, and there is you can see the book on the right hand side. So, this is by Myron Eichenberg. So, Eichenberg has worked on plague in different port cities. So, the name of the book is Plague Ports, the Global Urban Impact of Bubonic Plague, and in this book he provides a data set where argues where he shows kind of that how like between 1896 and 1921 12 million Indian lives were lost due to bubonic plague, and you will be shocked to find out that while the whole world actually lost 3 million people, only the subcontinent of India, so far as the subcontinent of India was concerned, 12 million lives were lost. So, one can understand how severe and serious this issue was. And an international conference on epidemics like cholera was held in Constantinople in 1867, and there delegates from different countries assembled and met, and so we have data, archival records speak and say that the representatives from France and Egypt, so the French and Egyptian representatives, they apprehended and they talked about this the severity of their problem relating to bubonic plague in the colonial city of Bombay. So, Bombay was actually described as the cholera nest, and there are also like discussions among different among different countries, delegates coming from different countries, that why they should actually not allow ports coming from Bombay, ships coming from Bombay to enter their ports. And this apprehension actually turned into a reality when a major like epidemic outbroke in 1896 in Bombay, and it the toil was huge, like lot of death and huge economic losses for the commercial colonial commercial center of Bombay. So, Hazare Singh, again working on epidemics in Bombay and on urban planning in general in Bombay, he says that in 1896 plague initially closed the ports of Europe to ships from Bombay. Yes, so the particular idea or the apprehension really transformed into a reality, as these ships no more could enter these European ports, the ships which came from Bombay. So, the export trade of the city got disrupted, and it also paralyzed the commercial life of the city of Bombay. Similarly, Kolkata was also the den of cholera, and cholera was characterized as a filth disease carried by dirty people to dirty places. So, one can see that how the colonizers wanted to conquer both nature and native in order to improve the health regime and the hygiene regime of this particular spatial sites. So, pollution had to be controlled by purity. So, the notion of purity, the discourse of purity was formulated, and the regime of purity was crafted. Pure water, pure air, pure soil and pure habits. So, the whole emphasis was on purity. And Pratik Chakraborty, he has done a very interesting work on Kolkata's mainly the river Hooghly, and he talks about the emergence of this of discourses and practices on purity, pollution and purification, and he also talks about clashing notions of purity between this officials, the municipal officials who were appointed by the British, and the Hindu spiritual lobbies. So, again we will discuss this in great detail when we discuss urban environmental history. So, this is a very interesting case of how during the colonial times how modernist production of spaces entailed within the larger process of colonial urbanization. Yes, so the era of what I call techno-legal improvements, technologies and various laws, legislations and acts were enacted, were passed to kind of to facilitate the imperial sanitarian reforms and morality. The major act was the ITA, which is Improvement in Towns Act. It was passed in 1850s, and the major idea was that the water works and sewerage in Indian metropolises would be carried in Indian cities, major colonial Indian cities would be carried out, and during this period like 80s, 50s, 60s, 70s, we also find the emergence of colony towns or greenfield sites, and the examples include canal colonies of Punjab, and Tandon has worked on these canal colonies of Punjab, and he says that these can be kind of designated as hybrids of British design and Indian life. But he also mentions that the vibrance or the how do I say that these were not lively. These colony towns seem to be too manicured and manufactured. So, it was drab and colorless. Again, this Improvement in Towns Act, this act was adopted in the Bengal presidency in the late 50s and also in the Punjab presidency in 60s, and the idea was also to set up municipal committees, and through the support of municipal committees which would also generate funds, the idea was to maintain urban utilities, basic water sanitation system for cities. Improvement trusts. So, the improvement trusts were created, and the idea was to kind of extend improvement facilities to the bastis, means the slums, and also like cover to bring these areas under drainage sewerage coverage, to create footpaths and privy cleaning service. And the first improvement trust was set up in Bombay in 1898. One can understand and easily contextualize it within the context of outbreak of the epidemic in Bombay in 1896, and like as per official data, archival records, between 1891 and 1896-97, Bombay's population plummeted from roughly 8 lakh people to 4 lakh people, so almost half. So, one can understand when the population actually it fell or it declined from almost by half, then why there were so much of anxiety, why there was so much of anxiety, colonial anxiety to flush out field from Bombay. So, the first improvement trust was set up, and it had to focus a lot on physical planning to address sanitation challenges, and we will learn later that how this entire focus on urban or physical planning also led to demolition of slums. In 1912, the second improvement trust in Calcutta was established, and finally, this was extended across different cities of Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, and also cities like Nagpur and Madras. Gradually, we see how nationalist agendas, nationalist aspirations also started getting accommodated within larger urban planning discourses and designs. So, for example, and also this legal framework that I was talking about. So, the first town planning legislation was passed in 1915. Again, this was the Bombay Town Planning Act, and it gave powers to the local self-governing institutions. So, if you go through the various provisions of the Bombay Town Planning Act, you will find that power was devolved or power was given to local authorities and local municipalities, and who were allowed to continue with several activities like zoning, building regulations, acquisition of land for public purposes, collection of funds for local improvements, etc. And also mainly to kind of provide orderly development, sanitation, social amenities, and low cost housing. Again, we will get into this in our next lecture, in our next presentation, that the aim or the target was low cost housing, providing low cost housing, but could it really meet its target and objective so far as practical implementation or execution was concerned or not. So, this is a major question which we would and the answer we would try to discuss in our next presentation. So, in 1919, same sets of legislations for United Provinces, we find similar sets of legislations for other areas, including United Provinces 1919 and Madras South 1920. And the Madras Town Planning Act, it says like, so it actually made obligatory for local authorities to prepare general town planning schemes with respect to land under their jurisdiction. So, under local jurisdiction and in the immediate vicinity. So, one can definitely understand that how nationalized needs were getting accommodated within the larger colonial urban planning and development discourse. I think this lecture would be absolutely incomplete. Rather, my idea was also to have a separate lecture on Patrick Geddes, but then I decided to just talk about Patrick Geddes in this particular lecture. But of course, I would encourage you to learn more or know more about Patrick Geddes and his theories and principles on urban planning, and moreover like his philosophy, I would say philosophy on urban environmental planning, because I think this is I mean, he was a visionary, and lot of things that we are discussing today was discussed long back by Patrick Geddes. So, it is an interesting story that how he arrived here. So, he was actually invited by the governor of Madras to come and exhibit his city designs. So, he came in 1915, the year when the Bombay Legislation Act was passed, so he came in 15, but then the rulers of the princely states were so impressed by him that they asked him to stay back and to also design city designs for their for the capitals of the princely states. So, Patrick Geddes stayed here for almost 9 long years, and he left only in 1924. So, he was basically a Scottish designer, a Scottish architect, and to him town planning was not restricted to physical planning or physical layout, but it had to address the consciousness of the whole community. So, this was the Geddian paradigm, the Geddian idea, and he advocated the understanding of historical evolution of society whose environment was to be planned. So, this connection between society and environment, the connection between social processes and spatial forms, the connection between social development of community and physical environment, this was highlighted by Patrick Geddes during that particular point of time. So, and for example, if you see this triangle, if you see the triangle on the right side bottom of this presentation, Patrick Geddes talked about like how people actually they act on economic processes like farming, construction, etc., that also shape a place. So, place, folk and work, they were to the Geddian paradigm, these were inherently interconnected to each other. And so, Miller has worked on the Geddian paradigm, and Miller says that Geddes was totally scathing about the expensive and unrealistic activities of the British engineers and sanitarians with their belief in wide open thoroughfares, wholesale destruction of slum areas, flush sewers, etc. So, while improvement trust really had the powers to make a comprehensive impact on the total environment of the city. So, he was critical about the way colonial urbanization was taking place, but unfortunately with the apparatus of rule in colonial hands, the Geddian paradigm, it had its limited reach and impact on the colonial cities of India. But of course, his ideas, his philosophy relating to urban environmental planning, it had a long influence, and on even like on planners like Bogle, and on like urban experts and like sociologists like R. Mukherjee, and who also talked about social planning and the role of community, the role of community superseding zoning in planning. So, why society and community and the interrelationship between the metabolic relationship between society and nature were so very important. So, this was I think highlighted and emphasized in the works of Patrick Geddes, and definitely you must go through his seminal work called City in Evolution. So, yes, with this I move on to the last part of this presentation, the last slide. I mean, number of plans which were kind of designed or which were discussed during 1930s, during 1930s and 40s could not finally get materialized, because there, I mean, if you take a look into the global context, then during this time the world was I mean, encountering a number of problems, Great Depression, the two world wars, and the very topsy-turvy period of the very topsy-turvy interwar period. So, the priorities had to shift, and this period can be best described and explained as national hiatus due to global cacophony. New Delhi is the only exception, because like development work and construction of New Delhi as a new capital, it continued. And in 1946, finally a report was published by the Survey and Development Committee under the chairmanship of Sir Joseph Ward, where they talked about, and this is the I think the most important report before India actually got independence. So, this is the last and seminal report on urban planning in India, and of colonial urban planning in India. And this particular report, it talked about the need for the creation of Ministry of Housing and Town Planning in every province, and talked of the need for well equipped provincial directorates of town planning, and also the appointment of an expert in the Central Ministry of Health, who would scrutinize the various and also advise on the various town planning schemes, seeking financial support from both center and state. So, these are the references to go through Mariam Dosal and Pratik Chakraborty, Narayani Gupta's works, Sporek's works, of course. So, to conclude, the key highlights that have been covered in this lecture include colonial categorization or colonial urbanization. We have shown, we have argued that why colonial urbanization is a valid category, because it is tuned to the concept of the drain of wealth, and it was absolutely geared to the agenda, to the colonial capitalist agenda of drain of wealth from the colony to the mother country, that is Great Britain. And we discussed like how the imperial battle against filth crafted the regime of improvement, and definitely when this regime of improvement was crafted, how different techno legal arrangements and apparatus were made to implement the era of improvement. So, this includes the passage of town planning acts and legislations, and also the creation of improvement trusts. So, town planning acts and legislations were passed and improvement trusts were created to tackle urban environmental needs. So, we are mainly focused on the major cities like Bombay, Calcutta and Madras. And we also discussed a bit on the Gadian paradigm, because I talked about the importance of the philosophy and the idea, or rather ideal also, of Patrick Geddes, so far as the metabolic relationship between city and nature, between societal development and physical environment in cities were concerned. And finally, we ended this lecture with a little bit, with a discussion on the hiatus in implementation of the plans due to the different challenges that the world started encountering during the period of during the first half of the 20th century, from 30s. So, 30s the world, the Great Depression with its impact on the different other countries. So, it started with the United States, and like as the economy of different other countries were closely tied up with the United States. So, definitely it also had a global impact. So, the Great Depression on one hand, and on the other hand the two world wars, and also the interwar period, the various constraints or the various challenges that cropped up, that appeared that during the interwar period. To a great extent, it obstructed the materialization and consolidation of various plans which were initially designed. So, there was hiatus in implementation of plans due to global cacophony. So, we had discussed all these in details in this particular lecture, and I would very much encourage you to go through some of the major references that is there in the slides in the in text. I mean, the references have been inserted as in text citations. So, please go through those references, so that what we had discussed, some of the basic points, you can have a more detailed understanding of some of the points covered in this lecture once you go through, at least if not the full articles, but the abstract of the reference, I mean the articles that are there in the reference list. So, thank you.